All right. Well, welcome to the Inbound Lunch Bunch. We are finally in November. It's hard to believe that we are pretty much at the end of the year. But today what we're going to talk about is getting new leads through eBooks. So an interesting topic, certainly very specific and very relevant to the inbound methodology and what we've heard. So just some introductions for those of you who don't know me. My name is Manisha Mangus. I'm the Director of Consulting here at HighRoad Solutions. I have over 15 years of digital marketing experience. I've spent a lot of time working with associations and helping them understand best practices with regard to digital marketing and doing a lot of lead gen programs and social media marketing as well. So I'm always looking for ways to connect, so certainly please feel free to reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn or by email. We are always looking to share topics and discuss items of interest for marketing practitioners. So if you have any specific questions or anything that you want us to kind of delve into deeper, please certainly feel free to reach out to us so that we can put it on the schedule. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we go ahead and get started. Probably for those of you who are new, we have a ton of resources that are available. We record all of our sessions. And we have a number of them available from going back through a couple of years now. There are toolkits that are also available. If you're not on our subscription list, I highly recommend that you do. It's always nice to get, as a marketing practitioner, it's always nice to use something rather than create something from scratch. So these toolkits are pretty handy. If you're looking for budgeting, if you're looking for just marketing planning, if you're just looking for social media inventory, they're all a number of them available through our program, so I encourage you to check those out. In case I drop off the call for whatever reason or my screen goes blank, just hang tight and I'll dial back in, or if you get kicked off, please dial back in. And lastly, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window. When it's an appropriate kind of break in the presentation, I will stop and see if I can answer the questions, or I will answer them towards the end of our presentation. Okay. All right. So as always, we usually start with an inbound refresher. So we're going to go to in the diagram that if you've kind of been here before, should start to look very familiar to you. And it's basically the basics of inbound marketing. So now, just to clarify, because inbound marketing is a term that, I think has become very popularized and almost mainstream. And it's used kind of in a variety of ways. But inbound marketing is actually a terminology and a methodology coined specifically by HubSpot, right? So HubSpot is an organization that essentially has designed a marketing automation platform, and they came up with this, what they call inbound methodology. So now if you have been trained in any sort of marketing discipline, you'll recognize aspects of the inbound methodology to include lead generation, content marketing, right? Digital marketing, social media, all of that together, right? So it's very clever because what they've done is they've essentially kind of taken a lot of those pieces and put it into methodology and broken it out in a way that starts to resonate with you, because it goes down kind of to four main pillars. One is that, you as a marketer are looking to attract people, and you are looking for people that are unknown to you. They don't know you, you don't know them, you want to attract them. Secondly, you're trying to connect with them. There's something that you have to offer that would resonate with them, and that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to get them to further engage with you, which is the third step, right? So it's kind of a full-on engagement where they come back to you, from that standpoint, they turn into your customers, and then lastly, they're delighted. You delight them, and they remain kind of your brand advocates, your evangelists. So this is kind of their methodology, and essentially kind of move them down this funnel, identifying that strangers, in order to attract them, you use a certain set of tools or digital marketing tactics, like using the blog, using social media, using keywords, optimized in search engines, right, or having landing pages, right? So it's very clever and very smart, and what they've done is creating this methodology and a set of tools that you use to move people down, into what we call the marketing funnel, so that they come out on the other end, right? And so this is essentially kind of the smart way to essentially find those users that don't know anything about you. It's particularly relevant to associations now because, in the past, you've likely been focused on member retention, right? You've got a member, you want to keep them a member. I think associations do a great job in kind of the member communication side of things, where you've got, various newsletters, you're catering to their personalized experiences on the website, you've got a members only resource section, you've got a private online community, you're doing a great job in really kind of building up that engagement and building those evangelists and those advocates. However, it's really hard to take the same digital practices that you do for member retention and apply them for member acquisition. So member acquisition is a totally different side of the funnel, where really you have to go and look for those people who are your tribe, who are your people, right? But they don't know anything about you, and you can't email them because you don't have their email address, right? So it's a little bit of a challenge, but what we'll talk about today is getting new leads through eBooks is one of the ways in which you can take a lead generation program or create a lead generation program around that and get those strangers moving into kind of your leads or visitors and ultimately your customers. Another thing, and we often talk about this, so I started to kind of refer to this, but just to kind of set the stage for this as well again, is, I want you to keep in mind what this is, which is the SMART MarTech stack. So you may hear us or others talk about what your marketing technology stack is, and what that is kind of what's the compilation of all the systems that are behind you, providing you with information, right? So traditional MarTech stack in the past used to be, even when it was represented visually, you used to have your AMS, your Association Management System in the middle, you had your website, you had your content management system, you had your event platform, right? It was all kind of driven by systems. The difference now is that everything is driven by the user, right? And it's all about the user. So really when you think about it, the user is in control, right? How they want to consume the data, what time they want to consume it, your information, your data, your offer, your product, if it's relevant to them, how personalized it is, right? Everything that they do now becomes the center and the hub, right? So now you have all these systems that are surrounding this user, either collecting insights or putting stuff out, outputs that influence your user, right? So it's just a different perspective, but when we talk about your marketing technology stack now, we really think about kind of what are those pieces and how is all the data interconnected? Because in this day and world, if you really want to track that full digital footprint, you really want to think about using a marketing automation platform such as HubSpot or Marketo or Acton or something like that, because it gives you the insights at every different digital interaction that your prospect, right, or your lead will have with you, right? Whether they receive an email or they visit a website or they visit a landing page or they post something on social media or they see something that you have posted on social media. Right, so both of these kind of concepts go hand in hand together, your smart MarTech stack as well as the inbound methodology. Once you kind of think about those as we kind of go through what we're going to talk about today. So I used these slides a little bit earlier on kind of in a couple of other presentations, previous presentations, but I just wanted to also kind of bring this to your attention as well. Something to think about. I want you to think about what interactive content is, because that makes a big difference in how you put together your lead gen program, right? We all constantly struggle and we're fighting for the attention of your lead. We're fighting for the 2 to 3 second thing that will stop the person from what they're doing, right? Whether it's going somewhere or clicking on something to look at your message and then decide whether they want to do something with you, right? So interactive content is really important because it's content that results in prospect engagement. And that's the name of the game, right? So it's beyond something that's passive. You want to get into an interaction where it's something beyond just viewing the content. You want the user to actually, exchange or start to have that exchange of information with you, right? So the type of engagement that you want is something that results in value for the prospect. So it's you providing an offer, some sort of interactive call to action that starts to create that two-way channel, so that you are not merely broadcasting your message, right? And then at the mercy of someone who either drives by you and either listens, kind of turns their head and then shrugs their shoulders and keeps on going, right? Versus they stop, they're like, oh, this is interesting, I want to hear more, or I want to see more, or I want to do something else to kind of prolong that interaction, right? So when we think about lead gen programs in particular, you want to think about that interactive content and what kind of interactive content do you have or could you leverage? So the reason it becomes important now is because we're creating a lot more content today, marketers in general, than we were even a year ago, right? So it's not like we don't have the content. It's really a question of how can we package it up in such a way that makes the most sense for your particular targeted person or your user. So essentially, you want to educate your buyer, you want to educate your prospect, right? And you have to really kind of hit on the what's in it for me factor, right? So again, we want to move away from push marketing to pull marketing so that they come to you after you've provided them with something, and you want to leverage that factor of fear of missing out, which again, you know, has not been so popular in the past. We've just never thought of it that way. But if you don't take a look at our thing that we put in front of you, you might actually miss out on something that's a really good deal for you, right? But the real whole point is, you know, you gather more insights using interactive calls to action, and that in turn helps you identify your personas and build your personas, which is very important as part of the inbound methodology. But also it helps you in figuring out kind of what offer works best for your persona, right? So if you haven't already, I encourage you to download our recent results of the SCMA survey, the State of Digital Marketing and Associations survey and market research that we did over the course of the year. It's available now on our website. I encourage you to take a look at it. This is a graph from the results, which essentially kind of, we're talking about the effectiveness at educating the buyer and the difference between passive content, right, versus interactive content. So you can see kind of the jump and the differentiation to kind of say that, you know, interactive content is really effective at educating the buyer. And then, you know, if you recall from our inbound methodology thing, our inbound methodology image or diagram, is a really key step in moving that person from being a stranger into a visitor and moving them into a customer. Right? It's all about education, and especially you as associations are kind of you're already in the perfect mindset to educate. So I don't really think I need to explain this about why you need leads, but just, you know, it's likely we can kind of all kind of relate to each other, and at some point somebody is likely come to ask you as a marketer, you being the marketer and someone else, either an executive or someone else, will say, well, why do you need the leads, right? So why are you so worked up like that we have to get this off the ground, that you really need your landing page, like what's the big deal, right? So we know that, you know, we are tasked with growth. So we either are looking for leads because we've been tasked or marked with, we have a number that we have to meet from a revenue perspective, or we have a number that's a membership number kind of at the end of the year, we've got to meet that membership number, or you've simply got to expose our brand or build exposure for our brand or brand awareness, right? So really what we're doing is we're trying to find our people, right? We're trying to find our like-minded people that we know would respond to what we have to offer from an association standpoint. So you generally, leads are perceived as difficult to acquire. It's not an easy task, or it seems like it's not an easy task. And, you know, some of it is perception, right? That it's expensive, that the only way you can get leads is if you put out a lot of money, that you have to buy lists, you have to buy advertising, that you have to spend a ton, and that, you know, truly to get leads is a very kind of sales-oriented function. It's not a function of marketing. Also, it's a lack of awareness from perspective of what you can do with digital marketing and what techniques you can use. It's also not realizing that you can segment your audience and really target and figure out who you're going out after, right? So really persona identification, personalization, all those things, you know, if you don't know that's how you should kind of approach your whole lead gen model, it's perceived as a little bit more difficult, right? And then, you know, leads are difficult to acquire, possibly just from a tactical, logistical standpoint, that you're not where the fish are, right? So you're not actually going after the traditional channels, which is email, or you're kind of putting an ad on a website and waiting for people to come to you, right? Instead of thinking about, oh, maybe I should tap into social media. Maybe I should do a combination of purchased ad buys as well as organic placements on certain networks, right? So it's a combination of all these things that start to make lead gen programs a little bit more difficult to try to get off the ground. So the reality is, without them, you're kind of stuck in this funnel. So if you see this diagram, right, as I said, email automation particularly, you know, is very effective, kind of starting at the bottom of the funnel of this part here, where as associations, you're focused on retention. So that works really well. You've got an email program, email marketing program. You're working with your customers, your members, your donors, and you're recycling all the information really well, and you're moving them you know, from consuming one piece of information to another. The flip side is that you have to actually now, kind of as part of member acquisition, right, getting those leads and lead generation, you have to work the top of the funnel. The top of the funnel is really hard to do if all you do is email marketing. And that's where marketing automation comes into play, and therefore that's where the inbound methodology is talking about, right? So if you recall from our inbound methodology diagram, we're talking about the unknown strangers, the strangers that eventually turn into visitors. How do we attract them? We attract them using a blog, using something on social media, using landing pages, right? Using optimized keywords, things like that to get them into the funnel and to bite. So having said all that and set the stage for it, lead gen is very effective, or rather eBooks are rather very effective as part of a lead gen program. And why is that the case? Right, so one of the things that we notice is that, you know, obviously there's a shift in audience demographics today. Everyone is focusing on millennials. Millennials themselves have they have different requirements. They not only have different requirements, they consume information in a very different way than we're traditionally used to, right? For baby boomers and for Gen X, right? So YouTube is really the source for the do-it-yourselfers, right, inside of the millennials, right? So again, you know, millennial will not have a problem saying, oh, well, I figured out how to recharge or reset my iPhone or open up the whole thing, and I just, I went to YouTube and I went ahead and I checked it out, right? So they are very familiar or used to or comfortable with multimedia, right? So it's no longer, let me go to the library, right? It's no longer, let me check if something is in print. Let me go find the manual, right? It's all online, it's online searches, and let me go see if somebody's done this before, right? So traditional print is popular with other generations, but now what you're seeing is always complemented by other digital sources of information. I think if you take a look at your own browsing experiences and start to look at what you yourself consume, you'll see that digital, digital components that are complementary are not exact replicas of the print, right? So if you're a subscriber to Bon Appetit, you get the magazine, you enjoy reading that, you probably get notifications to say or you'll see in the articles themselves, they're calling out to say, go online to see this, and it's not exactly the same type of information. Just try to diversify the offering, right? So that's essentially why ebooks are now much more popular. One, we have more content that's been created, and the expectation is that it's going to be different, right? So it's not a copy of something that's already available in print, and most people are used to it. Most people are expecting that what I see in print is going to be different from what I see electronically. eBooks in general are generally easier to produce, right? So they're cost effective, they can be updated, much more frequently than a print publication, right? And then more importantly, you can use digital marketing to widen that exposure a little bit more effectively. So on top of that, ebooks in general can be used for many different things. So as I said, you use them in many different channels, they're shareable, they're updatable, and they can support search engine optimization. That's one of the things, again, especially inside of inbound, as part of the inbound methodology, everything that you have sitting out there, all your digital outposts that are sitting out there need to be transmitting and receiving information, and they need to be transmitting the optimized experience as possible, so that should someone search for something, you show up in search results, right? So again, all the digital pieces of anything, any kind of information or content that you put out there need to be optimized in such a way so that you can attract those people, right? What's nice about ebooks also is that they provide you additional data insights, right? Not only just the fact that somebody downloaded it, but at what time of day did they download it, and what device did they use to view your material. Where did they come from? Did they come directly as a direct link? Did they come through an email? Did they come through an online ad? Was it a referral source? Right? Did they leave halfway through the process? How long did it take before they left the ebook? Right? There are a lot of things that you can kind of collect that you not necessarily would be able to collect in such an easy format if you were doing a print publication. So a couple of things to think about. You know, there is a perception that ebooks are, what are we going to do? What information do we have to offer? You know, there's a lot of different ideas for associations, which I kind of like here, right? So you can take, you know, pretty much anything that you have and convert it into an interactive ebook. There are no hard and fast rules to say that you can't do that. There's no reason why you can't take something like an annual report, or take career profiles, or do a deep dive on critical issues, or some sort of advocacy platform overview, and convert that into an ebook type of offering. Industry research is traditionally what is offered, but again, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the only route to take. For example, there's one organization, the ERA, the Electronic Retail Association. What they did is they put together an ebook on the most popular blogs that were about a specific topic or series. So what they did is they originally created a blog, and it came from industry experts or members, right? So they called through all their members and really kind of promoted the fact that these members were experts within their field. And, you know, the members themselves really did want to be featured on this blog. So they built a whole following of people subscribed to the blog, producing all this material. And then what they did is they went ahead and they produced an ebook on a certain topic. And so they pulled all these blog entries together and then kind of repackaged it and offered it as an ebook, kind of complimentary, heading into the conference that complemented one of the in-person sessions that was delivered. Right, so it's taking content that you currently have and presenting it in a way that's of use or of value to your members, right, to your prospects. So again, the things that you want to consider when you're thinking about how do I get this off the ground, obviously I need my ebook. You want to think about finding appealing and relevant content in a format that's optimized for online use. Remember, it's not the same as a PDF, right? So PDF is a static document. You really want to have something that converts the PDF into HTML5, right? So for online reading from the URL link. And that is specifically for those users, those millennials, who aren't interested in traditionally saving something to desktop and then taking the file with them, right, on a zip drive or taking it on their laptop. They want something that's mobile, on the go, easily accessible at any time using any type of device, right? And so that's what you're seeing, a shift away from. An ebook is not simply a digital representation of a book, of actual publication book. We're seeing kind of the translation of this transformation of content into a format that is truly portable. Right, the idea here is that you're giving content for free in exchange for information, and that's the key thing that leads the ebook into your lead gen program. Right, so obviously in order to do that, you would need landing pages to convert those prospects into leads, right? And on your landing page, you would need to convince them to submit their information, right? So again, going back to that inbound methodology, what do you really need to start? You obviously need your ebook. Then you need your landing page, right? How you'll explain or pitch your offer to someone. You obviously need a form, right? Probably the key, most important piece of information or elements to make sure that you have as part of your campaign, which is deciding what data you want to exchange for your ebook, right? So if you're going to give away your content for free, what are you willing to, what do you want to ask for it? And then lastly, a workflow, how you're going to actually follow up with your leads, right? So again, getting new leads through ebooks, that's great. You've got submissions. Now, what are you going to do with them? How are you going to keep them warm? How are you going to further qualify them and move them down the funnel? Those are some of the things that, the elements of what you need to identify before you put the whole thing together. So an example of a landing page, I like this example again because, you know, there is a lot of text on this page, but it's put together in a compelling way to kind of say, like, here's what you want to do. You want to get a guide for mobility for business, right? And so it's asking you, you can kind of see the tone of voice, the questions, the positioning of it. All of this information is important because someone who's on here has found your page, right, either through a search or through some sort of pointer, some digital pointer that you put them on. And now this is your chance. And you really only have one chance. This is your chance to say, here's what I'm going to give you. You know, are you interested, right? So you're really trying to you're really doing the product push at this point. What you can further do, and this is kind of the interactive piece of it, which I kind of like, it's a cool example, is that you can customize your ebook, supposedly, right? So again, they're saying, you know, tell us which best describes your job function. And then obviously, you can share this ebook with someone else, but it's rather clever because again, it's collecting some insights without you quite filling out a form yet, right? So again, if you are trying to do some sort of qualification or you're just looking to collect some insights, this is a clever way to do it, to kind of say that, you know what, if, I'm evaluating the success of my lead gen program, if I'm evaluating how my campaign did, let's at least see kind of, who's coming to our site and who are they. So let's suppose for whatever reason they actually don't go forward and give me an email address that I can work with. At least they come to this page and they'll tell me that I'm a developer, right? Or I'm, an IT manager, right? At least I have that one additional piece of data that's collected that I can do something with. So clearly, I can kind of extrapolate. And then further, you can kind of use different positioning statements to customize your ebook or to give, that personalized experience, right? So again, remember, it's all about the user, right? So we want to tap into the user and their fear of missing out. We want to make sure that they understand we can personalize something for you, right? So we're not giving you something that's generic. In fact, we'll put something together specific to you. Now, behind the scenes, the technical kind of tactical, logistical execution of that, how does that work? It's probably the same ebook, right? So it's not like, something's getting compiled. It could be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. What you're doing is you're putting kind of a front face on it to at least demonstrate to your prospect or to your persona that I know some of your pain points, right? I know that you are probably, interested in looking about, interested in ensuring security and privacy. That's probably something, if you said that you were a IT manager, that's probably an option that you're interested in. So I'm going to give that to you. I'm going to show and demonstrate that I know this about you. That's making it more likely that you're going to say, oh, you probably do know, you probably have something I'm really interested in. So the flip side of that, or rather not the flip side, but the, passing through that, but then you can come to the actual interactive piece, right? So this is the ebook itself where you can break it down by chapters now, and you've given chapters, and you can kind of see how what they've done, which is rather clever. Some are locked and some are not, right? So again, this is probably likely based on, what they've selected or what they've done or what they've already read. And you can see up at the top, they said unlock all chapters. So I put that in here because, again, don't think of ebooks as a traditional, it's a PDF file that you print and you take it with you and you read it out. Right? You got to think about who's going to consume it, in what capacity, and where's the value. Right? So this is kind of, again, what's rather clever because they're creating an experience. Remember back to the interactive CTAs, they're creating an experience where you're doing some sort of exchange. It's a two-way conversation, and you're creating a little bit more demand. Right? So it's rather clever, and I like this idea. So I kind of put this in here, possibly for food for thought for you. So typically what we do in these sessions is we go through case studies, if I can find one, and I have one for you. So again, I thought we'd walk through this. So the American Payroll Association is using HubSpot, and one of their goals, or they had a couple of campaign goals, right? So one of them was to essentially, they had collected leads over a period of time, but they were rather cold. The idea was to, one, how do we collect information and contact information for our targeted personas? Who are they? We need to qualify them. We have a list of leads. We need to figure out who they are. And then, how do we go about doing that? One is we need to provide an offer that's compelling to the persona. We're going off of, job title. Job title is the first criteria. We really want to make sure or identify ourselves to these people and kind of expose ourselves to them. And make sure that they understand that you can get all these things if you become a member, right? So the idea is to collect their initial email address up front, and then initiate workflows for additional follow-up, kind of slowly kind of bring them along, right? The end goal is to get qualified leads and eventually convert them to members, right? So we kind of stepped through this case study and we identified our targeted audience and persona. So this is rather important because when you're, again, putting together a lead gen program, if you are going to use an ebook to generate leads, you really obviously have to have the right ebook for the right audience. Lead gen programs are really hard to do if you don't have in mind, who you're targeting, because otherwise you're going way too broad, and it's unlikely you're going to get effective results. So in this particular case, APA was looking to target young professionals in payroll who are looking for specific information on basic topics in the field. Right, so these personas, right, these prospects rather, they don't know who APA is. They've never kind of really interacted with them. They're rather young in the industry. They're just starting out. They've likely been tasked to get something done, but they don't have a lot of internal resources to lean on, no one to handhold them or kind of, provide them any sort of training. So we likely identified them to be millennials, right? And so again, knowing that about them, we put together an offer, and we started with our campaign elements, the first one, which is a landing page. So remember, our landing page here is to set the stage for the offer, convince them that we have something that they would be of interest to them, right? And make sure that they feel compelled enough or feel convinced enough to give the information to us. Right? You can kind of see here, we're using the big tagline of 21,000 people can't be wrong, right? We did a little bit of a focus group to see kind of what kind of imagery, what type of stock photography or images or of people would resonate with our targeted persona. So we're setting our stage for 21,000 people can't be wrong. Here's what we do. This is what we offer. Here's the ebook that's right for you, right? And then again, we're putting all the pieces together to kind of set the stage. This is a web page, right? So again, from inbound best practices, it needs to be website optimized. Obviously, it needs to be keyword optimized, right? So search engine optimization is a key point of that, because this is going to sit out there and start to collect interest, right? It's starting to collect people coming to the site because they've either searched for, something that has to do with understanding your pay, something about garnishments, something about payroll deductions, anything like that, right? So the idea is to say, we need to put our beacon out there so people can find it, but let's make sure that what's on our beacon is compelling enough for them to move to the next offer. So the APA's ask was essentially, the form, which is the most important component of your campaign, right? So you want to think about how much data can you get away with asking or collecting, right? So again, we were asking for very basic information. We wanted to know, obviously first name, last name, email address at minimum, and there was one more question that we could ask. What would we ask? We asked for years of experience in payroll. And the reason we asked for that is because, again, we're trying to identify what persona you fit into, right? And our personas are based on, yes, job titles, right? The job titles may not necessarily be, the most accurate way, because again, we're trying to find young members. We're trying to find people who are not members, who are young, who are going to stick with us, right? So again, while yes, we would want members across the board or people who convert into members, our offer for this ebook, remember, is for a younger generation, right? So the offer has to be appropriate to the people who are probably looking at this form, right? So in years of experience, we are expecting that people who would be filling that out would fill out 2, 5, 2 to 3, something like that, or 1 or less than 1. And that's the hypothesis and the supposition that we go into. What we've left also is topics of interest, right? And topics of interest here is not a required, it's just to kind of say that, it's an additional upsell to say that, yes, I want the ebook. It's us kind of saying, hey, by the way, we do have a lot more information. It's not just about basic pay, but we do have stuff on certification, payroll compliance, probably topics that you, as you enter the industry, have heard about and probably will get into, but you're probably not familiar with them now, right? So it's just kind of a soft sell to kind of say, if you're interested and if you're so inclined, please go ahead and fill out that information. Once I've done that, right, so once the prospect has come in and filled out the information, said, yes, I think you make a compelling case, I'll give you my email address, you send them to a thank you landing page. Again, this is one of HubSpot's best practices, or, from inbound perspective, you give them a thank you page to acknowledge that their form is processed, that you've got the information. But one of the things they really kind of is interesting because, again, it's from a very specific positioning approach. You don't want to get too overwhelming on this page. You want to get a very basic message out there, basic positioning, right? But you don't want to overwhelm them with all the information, right? So sometimes, you will see thank you landing pages that mimic website navigation, right? Or entire website navigation or modified navigation, right? So the idea here is to say, someone came, they gave us the information, really want to get them on their way and give them what they were looking for. We don't want to antagonize them further. We don't want them to feel like they got gypped or they got tricked, right? Because that's less likely. They're less likely to come back and respond to any other offers we put in front of them. So often you'll see best practices or recommendations on a thank you landing page, kind of say, here's the offer. Thank you very much. You will get something within the next 3 minutes or something like that. And then what we also put in here is a secondary user journey back to a specific section on the website, right? So what we said is that, you know what, we've told the user, right? We've told the millennial that, hey, the ebook's on its way. You're going to get an email. Don't worry about it. It's been taken care of. By the way, you know, you're just scratching the surface with this ebook. Check out the additional resources that we have to offer. There was a debate internally if we should take this and send them back to the home page, right? But the idea is sending a user or a prospect back to the home page is rather overwhelming when they don't know anything about us. Therefore, let's put them into something that's similar, kind of along a similar vein or similar track or user journey. Let's put them back into the store. Because again, we are giving them compelling pieces of information, and we want them to kind of walk away seeing, oh, here are all the other things I could get. I could get a website, a webinar on demand. I could buy another book. I could buy a bundle. Perhaps there's some online certification or training courses that I could sign up for, right? Rather than leaving them on the home page, which traditionally kind of presents the full picture of who APA is, right? But we haven't established that relationship yet, right? We're still kind of at the stranger level. We're not quite at the visitor level, if you remember the methodology and kind of where we are in that funnel. We're still very much up front, right? So it's a secondary user journey, but it's not a hard push. It's just something there to kind of reinforce. Then we move, so then, you know, obviously the actual real piece of the offer is the email with the download link that automatically fires off once the person has filled out their information and the form is submitted, right? And the idea here is we want to get to the point. Give them the offer. Don't string them along. Don't mess with them. Don't say, hey, you know, click here if you're interested in whatever, or, you know, fill out our survey before you get the form. We just want to give them the information. Right, so that's the idea here, right? The idea here also is when we're tracking metrics, you would track this as a kind of a validation, right? So the idea here is that, you know, we're making sure that the reason, you know, there are many questions, right? So one of the typical questions that we get is, why don't we just give them the file to download from the thank you page? Why do we have to send them an email? There are lots of different reasons. There's no one way or there's no one right way to do it. The rationale sometimes is that you want to validate the email address, right? You want to make sure that the email address they gave you actually works, and it's not something they just randomly typed in or somebody else's email address, and this is one way to do it. So we've kind of gone through our program campaign. We got the lead, that's great. Now for extra points, we set up automated workflows. Again, you know, the idea here is, if you go think back to our inbound methodology diagram, is to move that stranger from a stranger and turn them into a visitor. We want them exploring other properties, other digital properties, and then eventually we want to move them from visitor to become a customer. So we can use automated workflows inside of the platform to actually do that. So you can build out branches for those who clicked on the link to download. Then you can wait a week and send them another offer. And those who didn't click on the download can wait 3 days and remind them that the offer is waiting to be downloaded. So that's the kind of full end-to-end example of what APA, the American Payroll Association, did for one lead gen program. Again, it's taking an offer such as an ebook, really understanding and taking the time to say this ebook is appropriate for the following people. Now, in your case, it may be a broader audience, which is perfectly fine. It may be a narrow audience. The idea and the whole point is to say anything, any property, any asset, anything that you create as part of this program needs to be super specific and designed for supporting that offer, right? It needs to make sure that it's in line with what your ebook is saying, all your positioning and your copy on the page is appropriate, right? Because again, it is your one chance to have that interactive exchange of information, that conversation with that user to get them to give you that information, right? So this is why we use eBooks so much, and they're such great tools for generating new leads, because it's leveraging content that you have that represents your organization, right? And it's presenting it in such a way that's a very kind of personalized way to say, you know, we have something that solves one of your pain points. So then obviously, you know, closing out the program, you always want to measure for success. You don't want to just leave something out there and say, oh, I think it's doing well, but I'm not really sure. I think we have a couple of leads, but what you want to think about is how would you measure success? Because you have a ton of metrics now available to you, especially if you've got all your pieces kind of set up inside of the marketing automation platform, such as HubSpot, right? So you could think about the number of email clicks, right? The number of landing page views, right? Your number of form submissions, download clicks, and then beyond that, you can think about your page refers, right? Where is the traffic dumping, right? So where's the traffic coming from? Who's bringing your prospects to you? Is it, direct email? Is it organic search, right? Is it direct traffic or, referrals? And referrals, again, you can dive down into that and say, is it because we're doing a campaign on AdRoll, right? Is it direct traffic because somebody's clicking on a banner that isn't part of an employee's email signature, right? So there are different ways in which to gauge the expansion and reach of your program, right? The number of form submissions is probably the direct success metric that the American Payroll Association will look at to say how effective were we at doing this, right? What did we actually get in terms of actual leads that came in? Secondary to that, we would look at the number of actual download clicks, right? So again, it's gauging that interest to say that, did someone change their mind, right? Did they say that, they saw the offer was compelling, they gave the information, then somewhere along the way they just changed their mind, just didn't bother, right? And then what you want to think about is probably, where else, what was their secondary journey like? Where else did they go? How long before they looked through the ebook, if you have that, right? If you've got a specific application that's working that produced the ebook, that can probably tell you the download statistics of how many times that particular file has been opened, accessed, how long somebody was on it. All of those are really important, compelling questions, right? Because it gauges and it gives you insight into the level of interest that this user had. That in turn can feed back into your automated workflows, right? So you can in turn take all of this data, compile it into something and say, you can do if-then statements, or you can just kind of compile it and say that, all right, so let's get a list of people obviously who filled out the form. We want the people who did the download clicks. Now let's take a look. How many people downloaded it or opened up the file more than once? How many people forwarded it to someone else? How long did they spend on the ebook or opening up the file or perusing it or reading it? Right? Was it more than, did they skim? Does it look like they read? What device did they possibly read it on? Right? All those things kind of combine together and give you a sense of someone who's very interested versus someone who, I thought this was for me, but actually it doesn't turn out to be something I'm interested in. Right? Because again, remember, you're trying to build a relationship and have that engagement factor with someone through your call to action, right? Through your ebook, so that you can move them from becoming a stranger to turning into a visitor. Because the next thing you want to do is you want to give them another offer. You want to possibly subscribe them to your blog. You want to do something so that they continue to come back, because now they're seeing that you have other things of value that you can offer them. So then to recap everything we've covered today, right? So again, just, I think a statement that ebooks are a very powerful way to generate leads. It's typically, you'll see many organizations use this, right? The idea is that I want you to think about being interactive whenever you can. And again, that speaks to the volume of content that gets produced now over years in the past, and that also speaks to who you're designing your lead gen programs to. Likely you are designing them for younger generations, and if that's the case, then interactive is probably the way to go. One, to make sure that you become sticky, right, from a offering standpoint, and then two, you are providing value to a set of people who actually, they have high expectations. So you want to make sure that you're facilitating that two-way conversation for that level of engagement. Second, you want to make sure that your ebook is relevant and useful, right? So again, think about, often we have organizations that struggle to say that, the marketing teams in particular say we don't write our own content, we don't really have anything. I want you to think about like all the other things that you could do, right? So again, I like the idea of annual reports, career profiles, what ERA did with their blog, right? So you have a ton of information. You want to be able to tap into it and really think about ways in which you can kind of customize the content offering that you have. I think what we saw in the previous examples of, potentially customizing or just trying to gauge to see that, if you're this type of user, are you interested in this? We can lock down certain chapters because, you know, if you're this type of user, you probably aren't, but you might know someone who might be, right? Things like that are very kind of clever ways in which to gather data insights and then position your content to put it out to them longer term as well. So you want to leverage your digital marketing to build your exposure, right? So cross promote wherever you can. As to say, you know, if you have an ebook, if you've got your landing page, you've got everything out there, you have to drive people to your landing page. So you can do that via email, but you don't know the email, you don't know the email addresses. It's challenging because you don't know the email addresses of people who you don't know, right? So it's hard to do it via email, but you can use banner ads. You can put ad placements. You can do ad rolls, retargeting. You can use social media. You can have word of mouth. You can have other members share your banner. You can have your staff put it on their signature and their email, right? What you want to do is you want to make sure that you are cross-promoting using all the other digital channels at your fingertips as much as possible to drive people to that landing page. Because while the landing page is search engine optimized, if you don't do anything, you're kind of at the mercy of whoever happens to stumble onto your site, or you're waiting for Google to index your page before it shows up in search results, which will work, but it'll take a longer period of time. And usually as marketers, we're not really in the luxury to kind of wait. We usually have some sort of deadline or some sort of time frame, right? So this is a way to kind of influence that time frame and make sure that you have as much exposure and possible awareness of your offer as possible. And you want to make sure that all your campaign elements for the lead gen activity are actually optimized, right? So your landing page is search engine optimized. It's got the appropriate offer. You've got all your imagery and positioning and your copy appropriate. Even the email that goes out saying thank you is in line with setting the expectation of what they're going to receive. And don't forget to measure the results and refine, right? So again, the results of a campaign that sits out there, you can usually see the impact or the influence right away. You see leads coming in. They come in, you know, quickly or slowly, again, depending on how you've generated exposure to the landing page. But at any given point in time, you can shift and you can adjust. So what's interesting about the American Payroll Association is that you know, we had a list of leads. They were cold, right? So we needed to qualify them, or we thought they were leads, right? So we need to qualify them. So we put them through this campaign, and we assumed that they were going to fill out that question where we said numbers of years of experience. We assumed that they were going to put in the number of between 1 and 5 years because that's what we were targeted at, right? So what's interesting is that the first set of people who came through actually put in, you know, double-digit years, right? So they're actually saying that they have got experience 10, 15, or 26 years, right? So it's interesting because, again, we have to go back and reassess and reevaluate our hypothesis. One is to say, you know, are we sure we're sending it to the right people? Because we surmise that the leads that we had collected over time really fit into this persona. So we go back, right? And how did we do that? We found some of these, we got their information. We found them on LinkedIn, and we noticed that their titles, right, are their actual job titles with the data that we had just simply said payroll, right? Their job titles inside of LinkedIn demonstrated a level of experience more kind of commensurate with a different persona. Right. So what's interesting, again, is to go back and see, okay, so these are people who are established kind of in the industry, but they are not members. And we have never interacted with them before. So how come they haven't? So the next set of questions that, you know, we would delve into is how come they haven't heard of us before? How have they not done that? How have they never, you know, we don't even have them in our contact database in any capacity. And then secondly, what is it about the offer in this ebook that's so compelling to them? Probably they're downloading it for someone else, right? Likely they're in a management position where part of their persona is to make sure that the rest of their team, which is comprised of the younger personas, are aware of or have access to materials such as this. They are probably in a position to recognize the value of something. So our next hypothesis is, or our guess is that this is what's happening. So, you know, now in our iterative step process, the idea is to kind of say, okay, we do have these contacts. We clearly understand who they are. Let's create an offer specific to them, because they did go through that effort to kind of offer, you know, they gave us their information and clearly took what we needed them to take. Now that we know this about them, why assume or why put them into a workflow that's still for our persona? of someone who's young in the industry and starting out. We should kind of upgrade them, so to speak, and put them into a workflow and follow up with stuff that would be more relevant to their particular interests, right, given their number of years of experience, and we can cultivate them that way, right? So again, at any step of the way, this requires some sort of analysis, right? We would never, if we had not done this, we would continue to collect information and then send out the generic email saying thanks. We have more beginner information, and probably just turn them off completely, and they would, whether they would do anything else with us or not is kind of TBD. Right, so again, I encourage you to always go back and measure the results and refine them, really think about it and interpret what's going on. We can always help you with that, of course. So that's all I have for today. I'll leave you with this thought. I thought this was kind of neat. It's from Guy Kawasaki, so I enjoyed it. Right, but if you have more money than brains, you should focus on outbound marketing. But if you have more brains than money, you should focus on inbound marketing. So again, I think HubSpot is very clever in kind of coming up with this inbound marketing methodology, because it really does make sense, right? Again, it's an application of, practices that have been around for a while, but putting it into a way that, is easy to consume and easy to understand, especially when you're putting lead gen programs together. So that's all I have for today. I'll give you guys a couple of minutes back to your Friday. I hope you have a good rest of the day. I'll leave the line open for anyone who has a question to share. Otherwise, have a good rest of the day. Thank you.